In 1942, a U.S. platoon vanishes during a routine reconnaissance mission on a fog-shrouded Aleutian island, swallowed whole by a massive cave that defies every map and geological survey. These young soldiers from Midwest farms, armed with rifles and climbing gear, push into the uncharted darkness expecting a hidden enemy outpost, until boot prints lead them deeper, into chambers pulsing with an unnatural hum that warps compasses and minds. What starts as a simple patrol twists into something extraordinary. Walls etched with impossible equations pointing not to places, but to times, drawing the men into perfect hypnotic circles where their bodies betray them. One soldier crawls out changed, his flesh scarred by forces no doctor can explain, carrying whispers of a door that feeds on curiosity itself. Decades later, scientists breach the sealed entrance and find the platoon untouched, their faces frozen in rapturous horror. But the hum returns, stronger, hungrier. What ancient boundary did they cross, and will it claim you next? The fog came down like wool over the Aleutian Islands on the morning of October 17, 1942, thick enough to taste salt and cold on the back of your tongue. At the base of Unalaska Island, where the Bering Sea met volcanic rock in a marriage of violence and patience, the United States Army had carved a foothold against the Japanese occupation 40 miles north. The war felt closer here than anywhere in the continental states, close enough to hear on the radio interference that crackled through the night watches, close enough to see in the nervous way young soldiers checked their rifles. In a Quonset hut that served as the 163rd Infantry Regiment's Operations Center, 2nd Lieutenant Marcus Webb spread a geological survey map across a table scarred with cigarette burns and coffee rings. 23 men stood in loose formation before him, farm boys mostly, pulled from Minnesota wheat fields and Wisconsin dairy country, and deposited on this treeless island where wind never stopped and the ground remembered its volcanic birth. Webb was 26, which made him ancient compared to most of his platoon. Back home in Duluth, he'd spent 5 years with the U.S. Geological Survey, mapping iron deposits along the North Shore. He knew rock the way these boys knew soil, intimately, through seasons of attention. The Army had noticed that in his file. "At ease," Webb said, though most of them were already slouching. "We've got new orders?" Sergeant Theodore Kovac shifted his weight near the front, rosary beads clicking softly in his pocket. He was 24, a coal miner's son from outside Pittsburgh who'd grown up crawling through passages under Pennsylvania hills. His hands were scarred from childhood cave-ins, and he had a way of testing the air in closed spaces that Webb had learned to trust. "Radio interference," Webb continued, tapping a spot on the map where contour lines bunched tight around an unnamed peak. The locals called it the Sleeping Giant, though it appeared on no official charts with that designation. "Command thinks the Japanese might have an observation post up there. Hidden installation, maybe a radio relay." Private James Holbrook, standing third row back, shifted the small journal in his breast pocket. At 22, he was one of the younger men, married just 8 months before shipping out. His wife Eleanor taught 5th grade in Madison, and she'd pressed the blank book into his hands the night before he left. "Write everything," she'd told him, "so you can tell our children the truth about war." He'd filled 2 journals already and started this third one crossing from Seattle. "Indigenous people won't go near it," Webb said, meeting eyes around the room. "Onangan elders told the base commander the mountain is where the earth breathes wrong. Their words, not mine." Someone in the back snorted. Kovac didn't. He fingered his rosary through the fabric. "We leave at 0500, Webb said. 72-hour reconnaissance, standard loadout, rations, climbing gear, radio equipment. We find the Japanese installation, we map it, we call it in. We do not engage unless fired upon. Questions?" A private named Morrison raised his hand. "Sir, what if there's nothing up there? What if it's just rock?" Webb folded the map with precise creases, the way his survey work had taught him. "Then we map the rock and come home. Either way, we do our job." The men dispersed to their bunks to collect gear. Holbrook lingered, waiting until the room emptied before approaching Webb's table. "Permission to speak, sir?" Webb glanced up. Holbrook. The indigenous warnings, sir. Do we have any more details? Superstition, Webb said, though his tone carried less certainty than his word choice. Every isolated culture has places they avoid. Doesn't mean there's anything actually there. No, sir. Holbrook hesitated. It's just, my wife's grandfather was Ojibwe. He talked about places like that, places where the boundary got thin. The boundary? Webb's expression didn't change, but something in his voice sharpened. Between here and elsewhere, sir. He said some places in the world, the skin was stretched too tight. Webb studied the younger man. You believe that? I don't know what I believe, sir. Holbrook's hand found his journal pocket. But I know my wife's grandfather wouldn't go near certain lakes, and he was the steadiest man I ever met. Well, Webb picked up his own pack from beside the table. If we find a thin boundary, Holbrook, I expect you to document it thoroughly. It was meant as dismissal, but Holbrook heard the edge underneath, the same quality that made Webb a good surveyor. Curiosity that couldn't let a question rest unanswered. By 0500, the fog had thickened until the convoy of jeeps moved through near total white. Webb rode in the lead vehicle, Kovac beside him checking equipment with methodical precision. The road, barely deserving the name, wound up from the base through terrain that shifted from tundra grass to exposed volcanic rock within a quarter mile. They'd requisitioned cold weather gear despite the season. October, in the Aleutians, meant temperatures hovering near 40 degrees with wind that cut through standard-issue wool like it was gauze. Holbrook, riding in the second jeep, watched the fog flow past like something alive, condensing on the canvas roof in heavy drops that fell with the rhythm of a broken clock. He pulled out his journal, bracing it against his knee as the vehicle jolted over rocks. October 17, 1942, 0500 hours. En route to survey point designated Sleeping Giant. Visibility near zero. The men are quiet, which isn't usual. Even Morrison stopped his jokes after the briefing. Sergeant Kovac keeps touching his rosary. I asked him about it once. He said his mother gave it to him when he started going down into the mines at 14. Said it kept him safe through 2 cave-ins. He hasn't taken it off since. Lieutenant Webb seems focused. Excited, maybe, though he'd never admit it. I recognize that look from Eleanor when she's about to teach a lesson she really loves. The kind of focus that means someone's found a puzzle they need to solve. The jeeps climbed for 90 minutes, engines straining in low gear. At 0600 exactly, Webb's voice crackled over the radio handset. All units, we're at the coordinates. Dismount and prepare for foot reconnaissance. Holbrook stepped out into fog so thick he couldn't see the jeep behind him. The ground beneath his boots was dark basalt, fractured into geometric patterns by ancient cooling. No vegetation grew here, just rock and the occasional patch of orange lichen that looked like rust. Webb was already on his radio, calling back to base. Command, this is Webb. We've reached survey coordinates, beginning reconnaissance on foot. We'll report at 0800. Over. Static crackled. Copy, Lieutenant. Watch your step up there. Weather Service says visibility won't improve until 1400. Over. Understood. Webb out. Kovac moved up beside him, testing his flashlight. Air feels wrong here, sir. Wrong how? Can't explain it. Just wrong. Kovac turned slowly, as if trying to locate a smell. Like it's moving when it shouldn't be. Webb pulled out his compass, frowned, tapped it, frowned again. The needle swung lazily, refusing to settle on north. Magnetic anomaly, probably iron deposits in the rock, but he marked it in his field notebook anyway. Details mattered in survey work. The platoon formed up in standard reconnaissance spread, 5 yards between men, weapons ready but not raised. They moved northeast, following the slope upward through fog that seemed to part reluctantly and close immediately behind them. Holbrook found himself counting steps, a habit from training. When he reached 500, he pulled out his journal again. 0634. Hours. Visibility still near zero. The rock here is different from the base, older somehow, though I'm no geologist. Lieutenant Webb keeps stopping to examine formations. Sergeant Kovac seems agitated. He's walking point but keeps looking back like he's checking we're all still here. The silence is absolute except for our boots. No birds. No wind sound. Just the crunch of basalt under our feet and our breathing. Morrison tried to say something about the weather and stopped mid-sentence, like the fog swallowed his words. At 08:15, Private First Class Daniels, walking left flank, called out, "Sir, got something here!" The platoon converged on his position. Daniels stood at the edge of where the slope steepened into cliff face, pointing down at the ground. Even through the fog, the disturbance was obvious. Fresh scratches in the lichen, boot prints and accumulated dust between the rocks, heading toward a darker patch in the volcanic face. Webb knelt, examining the prints. American issue. Recent. Maybe a week, maybe less. Patrol from base? Kovac asked. Base commander said no one's been up here in months. Webb stood, following the prints with his flashlight. The beam disappeared into the darker patch, which resolved as they approached into something that made Holbrook's chest tighten. An opening. 40 feet wide, maybe 15 high, carved, no, formed in the basalt cliff. Not a man-made thing. Natural, but impossibly regular, its edges smooth as if worn by water that had never flowed here. Webb pulled out his geological survey map, oriented it, checked his compass again. The needle still refused to settle. He looked at the map, at the cliff face, at the map again. "This isn't charted," he said quietly. Kovac moved closer to the entrance, shining his light inside. "Gets bigger inside, can't see the back." "Could be recent," someone suggested. "Earthquake opened it up?" "The survey was done in 38, Webb said. 4 years ago. You're telling me this opened since then and nobody noticed?" But even as he said it, he was moving toward the entrance, drawn by the same instinct that had made him a surveyor. The need to map what wasn't mapped, to know what wasn't known. He keyed his radio. "Command, this is Webb. We've located a geological anomaly at our position. Cave." The fog had thinned by the time Private Holbrook's boots found the disturbed earth. He'd been sweeping the western perimeter of their search grid when he noticed it. A trail of scuffed volcanic soil leading toward the cliff face, too deliberate to be natural erosion. The pattern suggested boots. American boots, from the tread depth. Recent enough that the Aleutian wind hadn't yet smoothed the edges. "Lieutenant!" he called, his voice swallowed by the morning stillness. "Got something here!" Webb appeared through the basalt formations within seconds, Kovac close behind. The sergeant's rosary beads clicked softly in his left hand, a rhythm that had become as familiar as breathing over the past 2 hours of searching. His right hand rested on his rifle stock. "Prince," Webb said, dropping to one knee. He pulled off his glove, touching the edge of the nearest depression. His geological surveyor's eye tracked the line toward the cliff. 3 days old, maybe 4. Soil compression suggests standard issue boots, fully loaded pack weight. "American?" Kovac asked. "Has to be." Webb stood, brushing volcanic dust from his fingers. "But that doesn't make sense. Command said we're the first patrol in this sector since the occupation began." Holbrook had already pulled out his journal, noting the time, 08:47 hours, and the discovery details. Eleanor had taught him to observe before drawing conclusions, to record what he saw rather than what he thought he saw. The habit steadied him now, gave his hands something to do besides shake, because there was something wrong about those prints. They led straight into the cliff face, not toward it, into it, disappearing at the base of what should have been solid basalt. "Sir," Holbrook said quietly, "the wall." Webb followed his gaze. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The cave entrance was massive, 40 feet across at its widest point, 20 at the narrowest. Natural formation, clearly, the edges worn smooth by centuries of wind and weather. But the opening itself seemed too regular, too deliberate in its proportions, and more disturbing, it shouldn't exist at all. Webb pulled his geological survey map from his pack, unfolding it against the wind. His finger traced the coordinates they'd radioed to command at 0600. Then he looked up at the cliff face, then back at the map. "This can't be right," he muttered. "What?" Kovac moved closer, peering over Webb's shoulder. "This area was surveyed in '38 by the USGS, Comprehensive Geological Mapping for Potential Military Installations." Webb tapped the paper. "According to this, we're standing in front of solid rock. No caves, no formations, nothing but cliff face for another 200 yards. The three men stared at the entrance. From within came a faint breath of air, not wind exactly, but movement. The kind of circulation that suggested depth, chambers beyond chambers, tunnels that went somewhere. Holbrook felt it on his face, cool and oddly metallic, like the air before a thunderstorm. "Could the survey have missed it?" he asked. "Not likely." Webb refolded the map with sharp, precise movements. "These surveys are thorough. They're looking for exactly this kind of feature, potential defensive positions, storage facilities, anything the military could use." He paused. "Or anything the enemy could use." That hung in the air between them. The mission. The reason they were here. "The Japs could have blasted it open," Kovac suggested. "Set charges, created an entrance where there wasn't one before." Webb shook his head. "Look at the edges. Weathered. This opening is old. Decades old. Minimum." Holbrook moved closer to the entrance, drawn by something he couldn't name. The air current touched his face again, and with it came a scent he couldn't identify. Not unpleasant, but foreign. Ancient, somehow, though that made no sense. He crouched near the threshold, examining the ground. More boot prints here, clearer in the sheltered space just inside the cave mouth, and something else. "Cigarette butts," he called back. "American brand. Lucky Strike." Webb and Kovac joined him. The lieutenant picked up one of the butts, relatively fresh, protected from the elements by the cave's overhang. "Someone was here," Webb said. "Someone from our side, waiting or watching." He pulled out his radio, extending the antenna. "Command, this is Webb. We found a geological anomaly at our current position. Cave entrance approximately 40 feet wide showing signs of recent activity. Requesting confirmation. Have any other patrols been deployed to this sector in the past week?" Static crackled. Then the voice of Captain Morrison, tinny and distant. "Negative, Lieutenant. Your platoon is the first in that area since June. What kind of activity are you seeing?" Webb exchanged glances with Kovac and Holbrook. "American boot prints, fresh cigarette butts. Someone was here within the past 72 hours. A longer pause. "Stand by, Lieutenant." While they waited, the rest of the platoon arrived, filtering through the rocks in twos and threes. Private Carson, Private DeMarco, Corporal Hansen. 20 men in total, plus Webb, Kovac, and Holbrook. Young faces from Wisconsin dairy farms and Minnesota wheat fields. Boys who'd never seen an ocean before shipping out, now standing in the fog-shrouded Aleutians, staring at an impossible cave. The radio crackled again. "Lieutenant Webb, Command has no record of any personnel in your sector. Proceed with caution. Document what you find and report back. If this is a Japanese installation, we need to know the scope before committing additional forces." "Understood, Command." "Webb out." He collapsed the antenna and looked at his men. "Kovac, take 5 men and secure the perimeter. I want eyes on all approaches. The rest of you, with me. We're going to take a look inside." Sergeant Kovac's hand tightened on his rosary. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Go ahead." "Those Unangan elders at the base, the ones who warned about this mountain." Kovac's voice was steady, but his jaw was set. "My grandmother was Carpathian. She had stories about places like this, places that weren't on maps because the old people knew better than to mark them." "Superstition, Sergeant," Webb said, but not unkindly. "Maybe." Kovac didn't sound convinced. "But in the mines back home we learned to listen when the mountain felt wrong. And sir," he gestured toward the entrance, "this feels wrong." Holbrook knew what he meant. He'd felt it since they'd arrived at the peak's base. That sense of wrongness his Ojibwe grandfather had. Described. Places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where things that shouldn't be possible became dangerously real. But orders, were orders. Webb checked his watch. 0900 hours. We go in, we sweep the main chamber, we document what we find. 1 hour maximum, then we reassess. He looked at each man in turn. Stay together, stay alert. And if anyone starts feeling sick, disoriented, nauseous, anything unusual, you report it immediately. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, sir" echoed against the basalt cliffs. They switched on their flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness beyond the entrance. Holbrook pulled out his journal one last time, writing quickly. Entering cave at 0903 hours. 23 men. Temperature 38 degrees. Air circulation suggests significant depth. Boot prints lead inside. Origin unknown. Then he added in smaller letters, Eleanor, if you ever read this, know I'm thinking of you. Know I'm being careful. He pocketed the journal and followed Lieutenant Webb into the darkness. The main chamber was larger than any of them had expected. Their flashlight beams barely reached the far wall, 200 feet distant, and the ceiling disappeared into shadow overhead. The floor was surprisingly level, volcanic rock worn smooth, and the air was moving. Holbrook felt it immediately, a circulation pattern that suggested this wasn't a dead-end cavern but a system, tunnels branching off into the mountain's heart. He counted at least 4 visible openings in the chamber walls, black mouths leading deeper. Spread out, Webb ordered. Document everything. Holbrook, you're with me. Kovac. He stopped. Sergeant Kovac stood in the center of the chamber, head tilted, listening. Sergeant? You hear that, sir? Everyone stopped moving. Flashlight beams stilled. At first, Holbrook heard nothing but the drip of water somewhere distant and the shuffle of boots on stone. Then, just at the edge of perception, he caught it. A low-frequency hum, felt more than heard, like standing too close to electrical transformers back in Wisconsin. What is that? Private Carson whispered. Webb moved toward the nearest tunnel entrance, the one where the boot prints led. Acoustic phenomenon, probably. Underground chambers can create strange resonances. But Holbrook wasn't sure. The hum didn't feel natural. It felt, he struggled for the word, intentional, like it was waiting for something. Sir, Kovac called, you need to see this. The lieutenant crossed to where the sergeant stood near the northeast tunnel entrance. Holbrook followed, his light revealing what had caught Kovac's attention. Writing. No, not writing exactly. Marks scratched into the stone with charcoal or burned wood, precise and deliberate. Numbers. Webb leaned close, his geologist's training kicking in. Coordinates, he said slowly, latitude and longitude. He pulled out his map, compared the figures. His frown deepened. What's wrong? Holbrook asked. These coordinates. Webb traced them on his map with one finger. They're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles from the nearest land. He looked up at the tunnel entrance. They don't point to any place that exists. Private DeMarco had moved to the far wall, examining another section of stone. Lieutenant, there's more writing over here, but it's not English, not Japanese either. Webb moved to join him. Holbrook followed, his pulse quickening. The markings were different from the coordinates the platoon moves deeper into the northeast tunnel, their bootsteps echoing against volcanic walls that shouldn't exist. Webb keeps his flashlight trained on the ceiling, watching the basalt transition to something else, a mineral he doesn't recognize, crystalline veins threading through the rock like frozen lightning. Lieutenant! Holbrook's voice carries an edge. The private has stopped 20 feet ahead, his light fixed on the tunnel wall. Webb approaches, Kovac close behind. The wall bears patterns, not random mineral deposits, but regular formations arranged in configurations that pull at something deep in Webb's geological training. They remind him of star charts he studied at university, constellations mapped across ancient Greek vellum. Except these stars don't match anything he's ever seen. Natural formation, Webb says, though his voice lacks conviction. Sir, with respect, no, it's not. Kovac traces one pattern with his gloved hand, careful not to touch. My grandfather worked iron in the old country. Knew metal like some men know scripture. He showed me how you can read a pore, see the intention in it. This—" He steps back. "This was meant." Webb checks his watch. 11 to 30 hours. They've been inside 90 minutes, descended maybe 200 feet beyond the main chamber. The air still moves, but the hum has grown stronger, not louder exactly. More present, like a tuning fork pressed against bone. "Holbrook, you getting this in your journal?" "Yes, sir." The private pulls out his weathered notebook, Eleanor's parting gift, and sketches the patterns with quick, practiced strokes. "My wife teaches geography. She has her students chart stars each season." He pauses, pencil hovering. "These don't match Northern Hemisphere constellations. They don't match Southern either." "Maybe they're not meant to be stars," suggests Private Morrison, a farm boy from outside Duluth who knows his way around a rifle but looks increasingly uncertain in the enclosed space. 3 other men have gathered, their faces pale in the flashlight glow. "Then what are they?" Webb asks. No one answers. The tunnel continues downward at a shallow grade, widening enough for 3 men to walk abreast. The mineral veins thicken, transforming the walls into something that almost resembles intentional architecture. Webb's training rebels against the notion. Minerals don't grow in straight lines, don't form right angles, but his eyes contradict his education with every step. Private Jennings stumbles, catches himself against the wall. "Sir, feeling dizzy?" "Same here," admits Kowalski, a stocky kid from Milwaukee who hasn't shown weakness since basic training. Webb feels it too, a pressure behind his eyes that makes focusing difficult. The hum seems to originate from everywhere and nowhere, a frequency that makes his molars ache. He signals a halt, checks his compass. The needle spins lazily, unable to fix on north. "Kovac, you said the air's moving. You still feel that exit?" The sergeant closes his eyes, concentrates. His hand drifts to the rosary in his pocket, fingers working the beads through fabric. "Yeah, stronger now. There's definitely another way out, maybe a quarter-mile ahead. But, Lieutenant," he opens his eyes, "I don't like how the air feels. It's not just moving, it's alive." "That's the magnetism affecting your inner ear," Webb says, forcing rationality into his tone. "The minerals in these walls are creating electromagnetic interference. That's why our compasses are off, why we're feeling disoriented." "Is that what it is, sir?" Kovac's voice is quiet, almost sad. "Because it feels like something's breathing, and we're inside its lungs." Webb starts to rebuke him, then stops, because Kovac is right. The air doesn't just move, it pulses. Regular intervals like respiration. In, out, in, out. Webb has explored caves from Montana to Maine, never felt anything like this. He keys his radio. Static hisses back. They're too deep, the rock too dense, or the electromagnetic interference too strong. Either way, command won't hear them until they surface. "We keep moving," Webb decides. "1 more hour, then we turn back whether we find the other exit or not. Stay sharp. If anyone feels worse than dizzy, speak up immediately." They advance through tunnels that branch and reconnect in patterns that seem almost deliberate. Holbrook sketches their path, creating a map that grows more complex with each turn. The constellations appear at regular intervals, always the same configurations, as if marking something. By 1400 hours, the tunnel opens into a space that steals Webb's breath. The chamber rises 300 feet, maybe more. Their lights can't reach the ceiling. The walls curve in perfect geometric arcs, surfaces so smooth they reflect flashlight beams like polished glass. The mineral veins converge here, meeting in patterns that create a 3-dimensional lattice of crystalline beauty. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispers. "Watch your mouth." Kovac snaps automatically, but there's no heat in it. He's staring upward, rosary now in his hand, beads clicking through his fingers. Webb steps to the chamber's center. The floor here is different. Darker stone, worn smooth as if by centuries of traffic, though no expedition has ever reported this place. The hum is strongest here, vibrating through his boots, his bones, the base of his skull. "Sir, look at this." Jennings has found markings on the northern wall, different from the constellation patterns. These are deliberate, carved deep into the crystalline surface. Not English, not Japanese, not any alphabet Webb recognizes. "Could be indigenous," he says, examining the symbols. "Unangan people have inhabited these islands for thousands of years. Maybe this was a sacred site. Lieutenant!" Holbrook's voice is tight. "You need to see this." The private has moved to the eastern wall where the mineral veins create a natural focal point. His journal lies open in one hand, flashlight in the other. When Webb approaches, he understands why Holbrook looks shaken. The patterns in the wall, the veins of unknown mineral that thread through the crystalline matrix, they're not random. They're mathematical. Equations rendered in geometric form, calculations that describe something. Something Webb's education touches but doesn't quite grasp. "These are coordinates," Holbrook says quietly. "Not like the ones in the first tunnel. Those pointed to a place. These point to... I think they point to a time." "That's impossible." "Yes, sir, but I'm looking at them." Webb studies the patterns, feeling certainty slip away like sand through his fingers. Holbrook is right. The equations describe temporal relationships, convergence points where, what? Time thins, folds, opens? He forces himself to breathe steadily. "We document this. Everything. Photographs if the light's sufficient, sketches if not. This is beyond our original mission parameters, but Command needs to know what's here." The men spread out, examining the chamber from different angles. Webb orders camp preparation. They'll rest, document, report at first light. But as soldiers unroll bedrolls and light the camp stove, he notices something that makes his skin crawl. 3 men have wandered to the chamber's center, not walking with purpose, just drifting. Standing in a loose triangle, staring at nothing. When Webb calls to them, they don't respond. "Private Morrison, Private Jennings, Corporal Hayes." Webb's command voice echoes off the walls. No reaction. The 3 men stand motionless, faces slack, eyes unfocused. Kovac moves to shake Morrison's shoulder. The sergeant's hand freezes inches away. "Lieutenant, his eyes. Look at his eyes." Morrison's pupils have dilated fully, black pools that reflect nothing. His breathing is slow, steady, rhythmic, with the chamber's pulse. When Kovac waves a hand in front of his face, Morrison doesn't blink. "Get them back to the perimeter," Webb orders. "Physical contact if necessary." 2 soldiers grab Morrison's arms, try to pull him away. He doesn't resist, but he doesn't move either, feet planted as if rooted to the dark stone. His body has gone rigid, muscles locked against any force less than violence. "Sir, we got a problem." Kowalski is pointing at 4 more men who've begun walking slowly toward the center, expressions going blank as they approach. The hum intensifies, not louder, deeper. Webb feels it in his chest cavity, vibrating his sternum, making his heart beat irregular. Around him, soldiers clutch their heads, grimacing against pressure that builds like a vice. "Everyone back to the entrance tunnel," Webb orders. "Now, that's a direct command." Some men respond, stumbling toward the tunnel mouth. Others keep drifting centerward, adding to the growing cluster. Webb counts. 7, 8, 9 men now standing in concentric circles, faces turned inward toward something invisible. Holbrook staggers past, journal clutched tight, resisting the pull Webb suddenly feels in his own legs. A compulsion so subtle he almost doesn't notice his feet moving, carrying him toward the center against conscious will. "We have to go," Holbrook gasps. "Sir, we have to—" His legs betray him mid-sentence. The private's face shows horror as his body turns, walks him slowly back toward the clustering men. He's screaming, inside his own head. Webb can see it in his eyes, but his muscles obey something else now. Kovac drops to his knees, rosary pressed to his forehead, lips moving in rapid prayer, but the words come out wrong, twisted, as if the air itself rejects them. The sergeant's face contorts with effort and fear. Our Father, who art. He can't finish, can't remember. The prayer that sustained him since childhood dissolves on his tongue like smoke. Webb tries to key his radio, tries to call for help, but his hands move to his sides instead. He's walking now, joining the others. His mind screams protest while his body flows into position, completing an outer ring around the inner circles. The last thing he sees before his eyes fix on the empty center is Holbrook, tears streaming down the private's face, still gripping his journal. Still trying to write, still trying to leave Eleanor something, some explanation for what's happening to them. The hum becomes everything. The chamber breathes. The door, invisible but certain, begins to open, and 20 October 18th, 1942, 0300 hours. James Holbrook's hands trembled so violently he could barely hold the pencil. In the flashlight beam propped against his knee, shadows danced across the page like living things. The chamber walls seemed to breathe around him, expanding, contracting, though he knew that was impossible. His geological training, the rational mind Eleanor had fallen in love with, insisted it was impossible. But his grandfather's blood knew better. "No one is sleeping," he wrote, the words barely legible. "The humming is louder now. It's not a sound. It's inside us." Across the chamber floor, men were rising, not all at once, one by one, like puppets jerked upright by invisible strings. Morrison first, the Wisconsin dairy farmer who could shoot a rabbit at 200 yards. Then Jennings, who'd been sharpening his knife on a whetstone when his hand simply stopped mid-stroke, the blade, clattering to stone. Hayes, Patterson, young Tommy Reeve, Cherry Beeves, who'd lied about his age to enlist, still 3 months shy of 18. They walked toward the center of the chamber with eyes that didn't blink. "Morrison!" Lieutenant Webb's voice cracked across the space, no longer the calm geological surveyor, but something raw and afraid. "Jennings, stand down! That's an order!" They didn't respond, couldn't hear, or wouldn't. Holbrook watched them arrange themselves in a ring, facing inward toward nothing, toward empty air that somehow felt occupied. Their faces smoothed into expressions he'd only seen once before, on his grandmother at her sister's wake, when she'd claimed to see angels gathering in the corner of the funeral home. Peace or madness. The line between them too thin to matter. "Kovac tried to pray, but he says the words feel wrong in his mouth," Holbrook scrawled, glancing toward the sergeant. Teddy Kovac knelt 20 feet away, rosary beads wrapped around his fist so tight the wooden cross dug into his palm hard enough to draw blood. His lips moved, forming the Hail Mary he'd recited every night since childhood. But the sounds emerging weren't words. They were fragments, syllables that didn't connect, a language that tasted like copper and made Holbrook's teeth ache to hear it. "Blessed, the fruit, womb." Kovac's voice broke. No, that's not." He tried again. "Holy Mary, pray for us." His face contorted. "Why can't I?" The rosary fell from his hands. Holbrook wanted to go to him, wanted to grab his friend and shake him back to himself. But his legs wouldn't move, not toward Kovac. They wanted to move in a different direction entirely, toward the center. "Lieutenant." Private Chen, no relation to any future doctor, just a scared kid from San Francisco's Chinatown, pressed his back against the chamber wall. "Sir, we need to leave, right now." Webb stood frozen, compass in one hand, geological hammer in the other, tools of understanding that meant nothing here. His face had gone pale in the flashlight beams, shadows carving his features into something skeletal. "The coordinates," he whispered, "the equations on the walls, they weren't pointing to a place." His voice rose, cracking. "They were pointing to a time. This time, now. We triggered something by being here. Then we untrigger it." Chen's voice pitched toward hysteria. "We leave." "I don't think we can." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward into comprehension none of them wanted. More men were standing, drifting. Holbrook counted 12 now in the circle, faces tilted upward toward the invisible ceiling lost in darkness. The hum that had plagued them all evening deepened, dropping into a register that bypassed ears entirely and resonated in bone, in blood, in the electrical firing of synapses. 3 men have gone to the center of the chamber, Holbrook had written earlier. Now it was 12. Soon it would be more. He forced his attention back to the journal, back to Eleanor. If he kept writing, kept documenting, maybe he could resist. Maybe the act of recording would anchor him to himself. When Webb ordered them back, they didn't respond. They can't hear us, or won't. His grandfather had told him stories, long winter nights in the Wisconsin woods, about places where the world grew thin, where the boundary between what is and what shouldn't be wore down to paper. The old man had never been to Alaska, had never seen these islands, but he'd known. "The earth remembers," Grandfather had said, stirring the fire. "Remembers before we were here, before we decided what was real. Some places, that memory is stronger, hungry." Holbrook's pencil moved across the page even as his legs began to straighten, even as his body prepared to stand without his permission. Those 600 hours, more men walking to the center. I can feel it too now, the pull, like a fish hook in my chest, reeling me toward something I can't see. Across the chamber, Kovac had stopped trying to pray. The sergeant rose slowly, rosary dangling from one hand, and turned toward the center. His face held that same smooth peace. No, not peace, erasure, like someone had taken a cloth and wiped away everything that made Teddy Kovac himself, leaving only a shell that breathed and walked. "Sergeant!" Webb lunged forward, grabbed Kovac's shoulder. "Teddy, fight it!" Kovac looked at him with eyes that didn't recognize. "Can't you feel it, Marcus? Can't you feel how beautiful it is?" His voice wasn't his own. The accent was wrong. Not Pennsylvania coal country, but something older, something that predated English or any language Holbrook knew. The words came out in Kovac's mouth but originated elsewhere. Webb's hand fell away. "Sir." Chen's voice had dropped to a whisper. "Sir, I think I need to go to the center too." "No." Webb's order lacked conviction. His own legs were trembling with the effort of staying still. Holbrook felt it now, the invisible hook Chen had described. Not painful. Almost gentle, really. Like a mother's hand on a child's back, guiding him forward. Toward the others, toward whatever waited in the space between their bodies. His journal entry continued, handwriting deteriorating. "Webb is trying to get us to leave, but our bodies won't obey. My legs are carrying me forward even though I'm screaming at them to stop." 22 men stood in 3 concentric circles now. Only Holbrook remained seated, pencil pressed so hard against paper it began to tear the page. Only Private Daniel Garrett remained pressed against the wall, both hands clamped over his ears as if he could block out something that didn't enter through ears at all. "Don't look at it," Garrett whimpered. "Jesus Christ, don't look at it." "There's nothing there," Chen said reasonably, already halfway to the innermost circle. "That's what's so beautiful. It's nothing, but it's everything. Don't you see?" Holbrook didn't see. He saw empty air. Empty stone floor worn smooth by water that had flowed here 10,000 years before humans walked these islands. But the men saw something. Their faces tracked movement, followed something invisible as it circled, descended, existed. The hum changed frequency. Holbrook gasped as pain lanced through his skull, sharp and bright as lightning. Around the chamber, every man convulsed in unison, hands flying to temples. The invisible presence, entity, phenomenon, door, pulled harder. His body stood without his permission. "No," he thought desperately. "Eleanor. The baby we'll have, the classroom where she teaches, Sunday dinners with her parents. No." But his legs carried him forward. The journal fell from his hand, pencil rolling across stone. His last entry incomplete. His last message to Eleanor unfinished. Garrett screamed, a raw animal sound that echoed off crystalline walls. "It's changing us! Can't you feel it changing us?" Holbrook could. The pull wasn't just physical, it was reaching inside, fingers of something vast and incomprehensible sifting through his memories, his thoughts, his soul, if such things existed. Examining, tasting, consuming, he took his place in the middle circle, between Lieutenant Webb and Sergeant Kovac. Webb's face had gone slack, eyes reflecting light that came from no source in the chamber. Kovac's lips still moved, but instead of prayers, equations spilled out. Mathematical expressions that described things geometry wasn't meant to describe. Holbrook turned toward the center, and finally saw it. Not with his eyes, with something deeper, a perception that existed outside normal senses, outside the electromagnetic spectrum humans were meant to detect. The door wasn't a door, it was a wound, a tear in the fabric of what should be, and through it poured understanding, madness, both, neither. Oh, he thought, and the word contained everything: wonder, horror, revelation, surrender. The hum synchronized with the 23 heartbeats, with 23 patterns of breath, with the electrical storms firing through 23 brains. The men's consciousness began to bleed together, boundaries dissolving like sugar in water. Holbrook felt Webb's geological knowledge flooding into him, rock strata and mineral compositions and the deep time of planetary formation. Felt Kovac's faith and doubt tangling around his own. Felt every man's fear and hope and love and regret becoming his, becoming theirs, becoming it. The door was always going to open, he understood with terrible clarity. We were just the ones who arrived when it was ready. In the last instant before his individual mind fragmented into something larger and infinitely more lonely, James Holbrook felt his hand twitch. Some deep, primal part of his nervous system firing one final command. His fingers jerked toward the fallen journal, as if even in dissolution he could leave evidence. Leave truth. The presence noticed, and in noticing it made a decision. One of them would have to remain. One witness to carry forward what had happened here, one lock for the door they'd opened. The mathematics demanded it, and the concrete barrier had held for 67 years. Now it crumbled under Daniel Garrett's hands like stale bread. Sarah Chen watched through military-grade binoculars from 200 yards down the slope, her breath fogging in the October dawn. Even at this distance, she could see the wrongness in how Garrett moved, fluid and purposeful, like a man half his apparent age, placing river stones in a pattern that made her eyes ache if she looked at it too long. "He's arranging something," FBI Special Agent Marcus Reeves said beside her, lowering his own binoculars. "Some kind of ritual?" Chen didn't answer. She was counting the stones, mapping their positions against the equations she'd memorized from the cave chamber. The fractal disruption array from Garrett's journal. He wasn't opening the door, he was trying to close it. "Hold position," she said, standing. "I'm going up. Dr. Chen, we have orders to—" "Your orders don't account for what's actually happening here." She started walking before he could object, boots finding purchase on volcanic scree still damp from yesterday's rain. Behind her, Reeves radioed for backup, but she barely heard him over the sound building in her chest. The hum, just like Holbrook's journal described. It started at the edge of hearing, a frequency that made her molars vibrate. By the time she'd covered half the distance, it had become a pressure behind her eyes, and she understood why Garrett had broken through hospital security with the strength of a much younger man. The convergence didn't just open doors in stone. It opened doors in bodies, too, letting something else use them. Garrett didn't look up as she approached. His hands moved with meticulous precision, placing a chunk of magnetite next to basalt shot through with copper veins. The pattern spiraled outward from the cave entrance, or what used to be the entrance. The concrete Chen's team had documented just 3 months ago now gaped open, revealing darkness that seemed to breathe. "You're making it worse," Garrett said, his voice the texture of rust. Coming closer, feeding it attention. Chen stopped 10 feet away. The humming intensified, and she tasted copper on her tongue. "Your journal said you've been closing these for 67 years. Closing, sealing, containing. He set another stone, hands trembling now. Different doors need different locks. This one is the first, the oldest. It wanted Webb because he was a mapper, someone who understood layers and depths. His laugh was bitter. It got more than it bargained for. Geologists see time in stone, millions of years compressed into inches. Webb's last thought before it took him was about the Devonian period. You know what the thing did with that? It used his understanding to anchor itself 400 million years deep. The ground shuddered. Not an earthquake. Chen had felt dozens of those during her years in Alaska. This was different, rhythmic, like something vast breathing. Behind her, voices called out, the tactical team spreading across the slope. But their words seemed to come from very far away, muffled by the pressure in her skull. "How much longer?" she asked. Garrett's hands faltered. "To finish the pattern? 10 minutes, maybe 12. He looked at her then, and his eyes were wrong. Not the eyes of a 90-year-old man, but of something that had been many ages, seen many things no human was meant to see. To live long enough to finish it? Unknown. Even as he spoke, his breath came shorter. The hand with 5 fingers clutched his chest. The other, the stump, cauterized by whatever bargain he'd made in 1942, reached for another stone but couldn't quite grasp it. Chen moved without thinking, kneeling beside him, picking up the stone. "Where?" "Northwest position. 30 degrees from—" He gasped, body convulsing. "No, you have to get away from here. It's calling. You feel it. The pull." She did feel it. Had been feeling it since July, if she was honest. The tug that had made her notice the anomaly in her radar data, that had driven her to request permits despite Dmitry Sokolov's warnings, that had kept her studying Garrett's impossible biology when every rational impulse said to walk away. The same pull that had drawn Webb into the mountain. That had compelled Holbrook to keep walking even as his journal begged someone to stop him. "Tell me where the stone goes," she said. Garrett's face was gray now, lips blue, but he pointed with the stump. "There." Then 3 more at 45-degree intervals. "Hematite, if you can find it. The iron disrupts the—" His words cut off as the cave entrance split wider. Not the concrete cracking. That was already rubble. The stone itself, the basalt cliff face that had existed for thousands of years, fracturing like broken glass. And from within came the sound. Not the hum anymore. Something deeper, a note, so low it was felt rather than heard, resonating in bone marrow and soft tissue. Chen's team members, she could see them in her peripheral vision, outlined against the gray morning, had stopped moving. Just standing there, bodies rigid, faces turning toward the widening crack. "Oh, God," Garrett whispered. "It's early. The convergence isn't until—" He checked his wrist, but there was no watch there. Had never been a watch there for 67 years. "What time is it?" 9:03 a.m., Chen managed, fighting the urge to look directly at the cave, to see what was inside, to understand. Garrett laughed, wet and rattling. "Of course. Same time Webb's platoon entered the main chamber. It remembers anniversaries. It's been waiting for this exact moment." The FBI agents were walking now, not toward Chen and Garrett, but toward the cave. Slow, measured steps, their faces slack with an expression Chen recognized from the photographs of the preserved bodies. Not fear, not pain, rapture. "The pattern," she said desperately. "Just tell me—" "Can't." Garrett's breathing was ragged now, irregular. "Have to. Resist. You have to resist, Dr. Chen. That's the only way. The others, they all wanted to know, wanted to understand. That's the hook. Curiosity. The need to see what's on the other side." His remaining hand grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "But some things aren't meant to be understood. Some doors exist only to test whether we're wise enough. To leave them closed." His grip loosened. His eyes, which had held the weight of impossible years, began to dim. "Garrett, don't. Finish the pattern," he breathed. "You're a scientist. You see patterns. The spiral, it's a fractal. Each stone relates to the next by golden ratio. You can... He died with his eyes open, staring at the sky, the ghost of a smile on his weathered face. Not the ecstasy Chen had seen on the preserved corpses, just relief. The burden of 67 years finally lifted. She stood on shaking legs, Garrett's body at her feet. The walking men 30 yards away and closing on the cave entrance. The hum had become a roar now, and through it she could hear words. Not in English, not in any language, but she understood them anyway because they spoke directly to the part of her brain that had made her a scientist, that had driven her to map the unmappable and explain the inexplicable. Come see. Come understand. Come know what Webb knew. Her team members were at the threshold now, Special Agent Reeves leading them, his face transformed into an expression of childlike wonder. Behind them, more figures appeared from the tactical positions. National Guard, local police, even the helicopter pilot who'd been waiting at base camp. All of them walking, all of them called. Chen looked at the pattern Garrett had been building. 10 stones placed with mathematical precision. She'd studied sacred geometry, fractal patterns, the mathematical principles underlying crystal formation. Her doctoral thesis had been on self-similar patterns in geological structures. She could see it. The spiral Garrett had started, expanding outward according to phi, each stone a node in a disruption field that would counteract the cave's electromagnetic signature. She picked up a chunk of hematite, iron red and heavy in her palm. The pull intensified. Her legs wanted to turn toward the cave. Her mind whispered that Garrett was wrong, that understanding wasn't a trap but enlightenment, that Webb and his men hadn't died but transcended, and all she had to do was walk 20 more steps and she could transcend too. The stone felt warm in her hand. Alive. Chen closed her eyes, thought of her mother teaching her to count, her first microscope, the pure joy of discovering that the world made sense if you studied it long enough. That was what she'd always believed. That sufficient observation and measurement could unlock any mystery. But Garrett had spent 67 years being the one mystery that couldn't be unlocked, and his final gift to her was the knowledge that some doors stayed closed not because humanity lacked the key, but because the lock itself was mercy. She placed the stone. Her team members were at the cave entrance now, crossing the threshold into darkness that rippled like water. Agent Reeves disappeared first, his radio still crackling with the evacuation orders no one was following. Chen placed the second stone. Third, the pattern revealing itself to her trained eye like an equation resolving, each element finding its place in the larger structure. Her hands moved faster. The hematite here, magnetite there. A piece of basalt with copper veining at the cardinal point. The cave entrance pulsed, and from within came light. Not the beam of flashlights, but something else. Something that existed at wavelengths human eyes shouldn't be able to perceive but did anyway, because the thing in the cave was rewriting the rules of local space-time, making the impossible briefly, terribly true. The last of her team vanished inside. Chen placed the final stone. The effect was immediate and violent. The humming cut off like a severed wire. The cave entrance, the crack in reality that had been widening, froze. Then, impossibly, began to close. Not collapse. Close. The basalt growing, regenerating, crystal structures forming at visible speed. The radar screen glowed pale green in the dim equipment tent, casting Dr. Sarah Chen's face in ghostly relief. Outside, July wind off the Bering Sea rattled the canvas walls of the University of Alaska Fairbanks Research Station. Inside, Chen stared at data that shouldn't exist. "That can't be right," she murmured, adjusting the ground-penetrating radar's frequency. The image remained unchanged. A massive void beneath the sleeping giant, hollowing out the mountain's core like cancer-eating bone. Her research assistant, Marcus DeLuca, a grad student from Anchorage with perpetually wind-burned cheeks, leaned over her shoulder. "Equipment malfunction? I've recalibrated 3 times. Chen traced her finger along the screen's contour lines. The void descended nearly 400 feet beneath the mountain's northern face, far deeper than any natural cave formation should penetrate volcanic basalt. And look at these magnetic anomalies. The readings fluctuate in patterns, almost like a pulse. Volcanic activity? Wrong signature. Chen pulled up the 1938 U.S. Geological Survey maps on her laptop, overlaying them with her current data. Where the void now appeared, the Depression-era survey showed solid rock. Either our equipment is completely fried, or something down there is affecting the surrounding geology. Marcus straightened, cracking his knuckles, nervously. The Unangan elders aren't going to like this. Chen had learned that much already. 2 weeks ago, when her team first requested permission to conduct deeper surveys on tribal land, Elder Dmitry Sokolov had visited their camp. The 78-year-old man moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd survived 7 decades of Aleutian storms and understood the ocean's power to unmake human plans. My grandmother, he'd said in English touched by Russian inflections, legacy of 2 centuries of colonial history. She told me what her grandmother told her. Men went into that mountain when she was young. They came back wrong. He'd paused, studying Chen with eyes the color of weathered driftwood. Changed. She said they were not men anymore. Said the mountain showed them something. Chen had thanked him politely, filed his warning under folklore, and continued her work. She was a scientist. She dealt in measurable phenomena, not ghost stories. But now, staring at the impossible void, she felt the first whisper of doubt. I need to check the university archives, she said, closing her laptop. There has to be geological survey data I'm missing. Maybe seismic activity opened new fissures since 1938. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the research station's cramped office, connected to the university's digital library via satellite internet that hiccuped every time the wind gusted past 40 knots. At 2 a.m, searching through declassified military documents, opened to researchers under Freedom of Information requests, she found it. U.S. Army After Action Report, October to November 1942, Unalaska Island Operations. Her coffee went cold as she read. 23 men. Second Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Sergeant Theodore Kovac. Private James Holbrook. Names that meant nothing to her. Soldiers swallowed by a war that had ended before her parents were born. But the coordinates of their last known position made her breath catch. The exact location of her magnetic anomaly. The report was clinically spare. Reconnaissance platoon investigating radio interference. Entered cave system on October 17th. Final transmission at 0903 hours. Search conducted October 18th and November 4th. No bodies recovered. Cave sealed with explosives November 8, 1942, after extensive search yielded no survivors. Chen pulled up her radar data again, zooming in on the northern face coordinates. The sealed entrance would be there. Roughly 40 feet wide, described in the report as a geological anomaly not present on existing survey maps. Just like her void. She downloaded the entire file, including appendices. Most were routine. Supply manifests, search team rosters, official condolence letters to families. Then she found the witness statement, filed by the search team commander and stamped classified until 1992. October 22, 1942. Private Daniel Garrett recovered 15 miles from cave entrance, severely hypothermic and dehydrated. Left hand missing, wound cauterized by unknown means. Subject incoherent, making statements inconsistent with rational observation. Transferred to psychiatric evaluation. Physical evidence recovered. Service pistol belonging to 2nd Lieutenant Webb, rosary beads belonging to Sergeant Kovac. The file included a grainy photograph, a young man's haunted face, eyes staring past the camera at something the lens couldn't capture. Chen's hand trembled slightly as she printed the document. Over the next 3 days, she built her case. The university's geology department had limited funding, but the potential discovery of an unmapped cave system beneath an active volcanic region carried enough scientific weight to justify an exploratory expedition. She prepared permit applications, safety protocols, equipment requisitions. On July 10th, she returned to Elder Sokolov's home in the village of Onalaska, a weathered house overlooking Dutch Harbor, where fishing boats rode the swells like seabirds. He invited her in for tea, Russian style, served in a glass with a sugar cube. "You found something," he said. It wasn't a question. Chen showed him the radar data on her tablet, then the 1942 report. 23 soldiers disappeared investigating this exact location. The Army sealed it, but my equipment suggests there's a much larger cave system beneath the sealed entrance. I need to understand what's down there. Sokolov studied the screen, his weathered fingers surprisingly steady. "You think you will find those men?" "After 67 years? No, but I might find answers about what happened to them." "Some answers," the elder said quietly, "are not meant for finding." "With respect, Mr. Sokolov, I'm a scientist. I study geological formations, magnetic anomalies, things that have explanations rooted in physics and chemistry." He met her eyes. "And if what's down there is not explained by your physics?" Chen felt a flicker of irritation. "Then I'll expand my understanding of physics." Sokolov set down his tea glass. Outside, a raven landed on the porch railing, cocking its head toward the window as if listening. "The old stories say certain places are thin, the boundary between this world and others. The mountain is such a place. Every 70 years, maybe less, the thinness becomes dangerous." "What happens every 70 years?" "The mountain breathes," he said simply. "And sometimes, when it breathes, it takes people, or gives them back wrong." Chen did the math quickly. 1942 to 2009. 67 years. A coincidence. Had to be. "I appreciate your concerns," she said, "but I've taken every safety precaution. My team will have constant surface communication, GPS tracking, air quality monitors. We're not going to get lost down there." Sokolov rose slowly, moving to a shelf crowded with Russian Orthodox icons and framed photographs of children and grandchildren. He pulled down a small leather-bound book, its pages brittle with age. "This was my grandmother's journal," he said, opening it to a page marked with a strip of sealskin. The text was in Russian, but he translated, "Summer of 1875. The mountain took 6 hunters. Only one returned, but he was not the man who entered. His eyes saw things we could not see. He spoke in words that hurt to hear. By winter, he walked into the sea." He closed the book carefully. "Your scientists disappeared in 1942, my people's hunters in 1875. Before that, others. The mountain keeps its own calendar, Dr. Chen." She wanted to argue, to explain how oral histories distorted over time, how correlation didn't imply causation. Instead, she heard herself ask, "What do you think is down there?" "A door," Sokolov said, "and some doors should stay closed." But Chen had already made her decision. She filed the tribal objection formally in her permit application, included Sokolov's statement as required by consultation protocols, and emphasized the scientific value of the expedition. On July 15th, the permits were approved with conditions: minimal environmental impact, cultural monitor present, daily safety check-ins with local authorities. By July 18th, her team had assembled at the mountain's base. 4 researchers beside herself: Marcus DeLuca on geophysics, Dr. Patricia Yamada for mineralogy, and 2 graduate students, Kevin Torres and Sanvi Patel, handling equipment and documentation. They brought portable generators, high-intensity lamps, climbing gear rated for Alaskan conditions, and enough supplies for a week of careful exploration. The cultural monitor was Sokolov's grandson, Michael, a 32-year-old fisherman who made clear he was present under protest. "My grandfather thinks you're making a mistake," he said, while helping unload drilling equipment. So do I. Noted, Chen replied, checking her equipment manifest. They began drilling at dawn on July 19th. The 1942 sealed entrance was still visible, a concrete plug set into the mountainside, cracked and stained by decades of weather, but intact. Rather than disturb it, Chen positioned their access point 30 feet east, targeting the void her radar had detected. The specialized drill bit threw basalt for 4 hours before breaking through into open space. The sudden loss of resistance made the drill rig shudder. Chen leaned over the hole, shining a flashlight into darkness that seemed to swallow the beam. Cold air rushed out, carrying a scent like metal and something else, organic, ancient. "Air's moving," Marcus said, holding up a ribbon that fluttered in the upward draft. "Means there's another opening somewhere. The system is probably extensive." Chen secured the safety rope to their anchor bolts, testing her weight against it. "I'm going down first. Marcus, you're second. Everyone else on surface support until we confirm it's stable." The descent took 20 minutes, rappelling through a vertical shaft that opened into a natural tunnel. Chen's headlamp swept across walls that made her training rebel against what her eyes reported. The basalt gave way after 15 feet to something else, a crystalline mineral structure that caught her light and threw it back in fragmented rainbows. She'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of studying geology. Marcus landed. The cathedral chamber swallows the team whole. Sarah Chen's spotlight beam dissolves into the darkness above, never finding a ceiling. The space feels ancient in a way that has nothing to do with geological time, ancient like the gap between heartbeats, like the moment before thought becomes word. 22 bodies sit in 3 perfect circles. "Jesus Christ," Marcus DeLuca breathes beside her, his voice small and wrong in the vast quiet. Chen's scientific training kicks in automatically, a shield against the visceral wrongness of what she's seeing. She moves forward, boots soundless on the smooth stone floor, her headlamp cutting across the nearest figure. The body is desiccated, but intact. Leather brown skin stretched over bone, features preserved with unnatural clarity. The uniform, olive drab 1940s issue, shows minimal decay. No mold, no insect damage. Just the slow work of water loss in an environment that should have rendered this corpse to scattered bones decades ago. "Doc." Patricia Yamada kneels beside the body, her mineralogist's hands hovering over the fabric without touching. It shouldn't be possible. 67 years of humidity cycles, bacterial action, scavengers. "I know." Chen circles the figure, cataloging details with the detached precision that keeps her breathing steady. Dog tags rest against the chest. She leans closer, reads the stamped letters, Holbrook, James R., the name from the 1942 report. Real, documented, missing. "His face," Sanvi Patel whispers from somewhere to Chen's left. "Look at his face." Chen does. Wishes she hadn't. Private James Holbrook died with his eyes open, pupils dilated to black pools that catch her light and throw nothing back. But it's his expression that lodges like a shard of ice beneath her ribs. Transcendent peace, or absolute madness, impossible to distinguish. The corners of his mouth curve upward. Not quite a smile. Something that wore a smile's shape while meaning something entirely other. They're all like that. Kevin Torres stands at the edge of the second circle, his voice hollow. Every single one. Chen forces herself to look at the arrangement. 22 men sitting cross-legged, facing inward toward an empty center point. The circles are precise, measured, deliberate, the spacing between bodies mathematically consistent. 3 men in the innermost ring, 8 in the second, 11 in the outer circle. "That's a Fibonacci sequence," Patricia says, her tablet already out, fingers trembling as she types. 3, 8, 11, no, wait, 1 is missing. Should be 13 in the outer ring. 23 men went missing. Chen's throat feels tight. "We have 22 bodies." The implication hangs in the stale air. Somewhere, one man walked away from this. Sarah. Marcus touches her elbow, gestures to Holbrook's lap. He's got something. A waterproof case rests between the dead man's folded legs, held in place by hands that have curled into loose fists around it. The modern part of Chen's brain notes the deliberate positioning, protected, valued, meant to survive. She photographs the body from 6 angles before reaching for the case. The latches release with small clicks that echo too long in the chamber. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, a leather-bound journal. Eleanor, the first page reads in careful script, "If you're reading this, it means I never made it home. I need you to know what happened here. I need someone to know." "He was married," Chen says softly. The details shouldn't matter. All these men had lives, families, people who mourned. But somehow, this makes it real in a way the historical reports never did. A schoolteacher wife named Eleanor, waiting in Wisconsin for a husband who would never write again. Except he did write, just not to her. Chen turns pages with gloved fingers, scanning entries dated October 17th to 18th, 1942. The handwriting deteriorates from neat block letters to frantic scrawl, the final entries barely legible. Words jump out: humming, pull, can't stop, beautiful, terrible, door. "The walls!" Sanvi calls from deeper in the chamber. "You need to see this." Chen tucks the journal into her pack with the reverence of holding someone's last words. Crosses the space toward where Sanvi stands, spotlight aimed at the curved wall. At first glance, the crystalline formations look decorative. Natural mineral deposits that happen to catch the light in interesting ways. But Chen has spent 15 years studying geological patterns, and these are anything but natural. 3-dimensional lattices spiral across the stone, following mathematical principles that make her head hurt if she looks too long. Not random, not decorative, information. "This is the same pattern we saw in the tunnels," Marcus says, his tablet out comparing images, "but more complex, more concentrated." Patricia runs a handheld spectrometer along the wall, frowns at the readings. Electromagnetic radiation. Low level, but consistent. And the frequency... She looks up, eyes wide behind her glasses. It's in the ELF range, extremely low frequency, the kind that affects human brain activity. Specifically? Chen's pulse quickens. Temporal lobe stimulation, the area associated with religious experience, temporal distortion, out-of-body sensations. Patricia's voice drops. The God spot, some researchers call it. Chen turns back to the circle of bodies, understanding crystallizing into horror. They sat here, exposed to this radiation. For how long? Long enough. Marcus points to a notation in Holbrook's journal, visible on Chen's tablet screen where she's already uploaded initial photos. He mentions the humming got louder, that they couldn't leave, that their bodies wouldn't obey. Neurological override, Patricia breathes. If the frequency was right, if it targeted the motor cortex while simultaneously triggering the temporal lobe, they would have been conscious but unable to move, unable to resist, while they experienced... She doesn't finish, doesn't need to, while they experienced whatever these walls were designed to make them experience. Chen's hands are steady as she sets up the portable equipment to scan the formations, but inside something cold is spreading through her chest. This wasn't random. This wasn't natural. Someone, something, built this place, designed it for a specific purpose, and that purpose required 23 young men to sit in perfect circles until their brains hemorrhaged from overstimulation. "I've got the pattern mapped," Kevin calls from his laptop station near the chamber entrance. "Running it through the analysis software and... Wait, this can't be right." Chen crosses to him, looks over his shoulder at the screen. Numbers cascade down the display, resolving into coordinates and temporal equations she recognizes from doctoral-level quantum physics. "That's not a location," Kevin says slowly. "Or it is, but it's also a time. These formations encode space-time coordinates to a specific convergence point. When?" Chen already knows the answer before he tells her. October 18th, 1942. 900 hours. Kevin's face has gone pale. The exact moment these men died. The chamber suddenly feels smaller, colder. It's a trigger, Patricia says, her voice distant. The formations create a field. The field targets human neurology, and at a specific moment, when all the variables align, the door opens. Chen finishes, remembering Holbrook's final journal entry. It's a door, and we opened it by being here. But a door to where? Marcus asks. No one answers. Because there is no good answer. Because the implications branch into territories where science meets something older, darker, something that shouldn't exist but clearly does. Chen's radio crackles, making everyone jump. Base to field team, do you copy? She thumbs the transmit button. Go ahead, base. We're getting reports of a distress call from a fishing vessel 40 miles offshore. Coast Guard is responding, but Dr. Chen, they're saying the person they picked up matches the description from your historical research. Elderly male, missing left hand, claims to have been in the cave. The bottom drops out of Chen's stomach. Say again? They're bringing him to Unalaska Medical, ETA 30 minutes. Thought you'd want to know. Chen looks at the 22 preserved bodies. At the empty space in the outer circle where a 23rd man should be sitting. Private Daniel Garrett, the one who stumbled out of the wilderness in 1942, raving about changes and not them anymore. The one who supposedly died 2 weeks later in a Seattle psychiatric facility. Except now, someone matching his description is being pulled from the Bering Sea. 67 years later. Pack everything, Chen says quietly. Document what we can in the next hour, then we're going to the hospital. Sarah, Marcus starts. One man survived this chamber in 1942. She meets his eyes, keeps her voice level despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. If he's really still alive, I need to know how, and I need to know why. Because the alternative, that this chamber killed 22 men but spared one for reasons unknown, is worse than any natural explanation. The humming Holbrook described in his journal isn't present now. The walls are dormant, beautiful and terrible, and silent. But Chen can feel something in the air, a potential waiting, like standing too close to power lines, like the moment before lightning strikes. She photographs Holbrook's peaceful, rapturous face one more time. Then she climbs toward daylight, carrying the dead man's final words and the terrible certainty that this story isn't finished. It's only just beginning. The life raft drifted in the gray swells 40 miles northwest of Unalaska, its orange canvas faded to the color of old rust. The fishing vessel North Star spotted it at 14:20 hours on July 25, 2009. A tattered thing that should not have survived a single night in the Bering Sea, let alone however long it had been out there. Captain Roy Henderson brought his boat alongside, killed the engine, and stared down at what lay inside. An old man, maybe 80, maybe 90, skin like leather left too long in the sun, no supplies, no water bottles, just him curled on his side, one arm tucked beneath his head like a child sleeping. Henderson's deckhand, a kid named Tommy Marsh from Kodiak, leaned over the rail. Jesus, is he alive? The old man's chest rose, fell, rose again. They hauled him aboard with the cargo net, gentle as they could manage. He weighed almost nothing. His clothes hung loose. Military surplus, maybe, though the fabric was wrong, the stitching odd, wool that looked decades past its prime. Henderson knelt beside him, checked his pulse. Weak, but steady. Get the blankets. Radio the Coast Guard we're bringing him in. That's when he saw the hand. Or, rather, where the hand should have been. The left arm ended just above the wrist in a mass of scar tissue. Old scars, thick and ropey, the flesh sealed over as if by extreme heat. But there was no burning on the sleeve, no char marks, just smooth wool and that impossible wound. The old man's eyes opened. Henderson jerked back. Those eyes were too aware for someone half dead from exposure, too focused. What year? The voice came out cracked, dry as bone. Sir, you're safe. We're taking you to... What year? Tommy glanced at Henderson, then back at the old man. "It's 2009, July 25th. The old man's face did something Henderson would describe later to his wife as crumpling and laughing at the same time. A sound emerged from his throat, not quite laughter, not quite sobbing. One nurse at Unalaska Medical would later tell Dr. Sarah Chen it sounded like bones breaking. 67 years, the old man whispered, right on time. Sarah Chen's phone rang at 15:37 hours while she stood in the cathedral chamber, watching her team document the 23rd position in the circles, the gap where Daniel Garrett should have been. "Dr. Chen," the voice belonged to Lieutenant Reeves from the Coast Guard station. "We've got something you need to see. Fishing boat just brought in a survivor from the Bering Sea. Elderly male, severe exposure, no ID. Lieutenant, I'm in the middle of... Ma'am, he's missing his left hand, old cauterization, and he keeps asking what year it is." The satellite phone nearly slipped from her fingers. Around her, the crystalline walls hummed their subsonic frequency, and the 22 preserved bodies sat in their eternal vigil, faces turned toward that empty center point. Marcus DeLuca looked up from his EMF readings. "Sarah, what is it?" "Get everyone out," she said. "Now. We're going to the hospital." Unalaska Medical Center was a low building clinging to the hillside above Dutch Harbor, 16 beds serving the island's 4,000 residents and whatever emergency the sea delivered. Chen arrived at 1820 hours with Marcus, leaving the rest of the team to secure the cave site. The nurse who met them, her badge read Jennifer Torres, kept her voice low. "He's sedated now. Kept trying to get up, saying he had to go back. Back where, he would not say." "Has he told you his name?" "No, he—" Torres glanced toward the isolation room at the end of the hall. "He told Dr. Petrov he's been in between for 67 years, whatever that means." Chen felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. 67 years. 1942 to 2009. They'd taken his fingerprints for identification. Standard procedure for John Doe's. But when the results came back through the FBI database an hour later, the technician called Dr. Petrov 3 times to confirm. The prints matched a soldier declared dead in 1949. Private Daniel Garrett, born 1921, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Enlisted June 1941. Assigned to the 163rd Infantry Regiment, part of Lieutenant Marcus Webb's reconnaissance platoon. Last seen October 22, 1942, emerging from the wilderness on Unalaska Island, incoherent and missing his left hand. Official cause of death, complications from psychological trauma and infection, November 3, 1942, at a psychiatric facility in Seattle. Chen stood outside the isolation room, staring through the narrow window at the figure on the bed. He looked 90 years old. Gaunt face, white hair sparse against the pillow, skin mapped with age spots. The stump of his left wrist rested on the blanket, that impossible scar tissue smooth as glass. She thought of Holbrook's journal entry. "I had to leave. I was the only one it let go." Not Holbrook. Garrett. The one who got away. The witness. Dr. Petrov joined her, a tired man in his 50s with Soviet-era training and Alaskan grit. "You're the geophysicist who found the cave." "Yes?" "He asked for you, before we sedated him. Said your name." Petrov's eyes were troubled. "How would he know who you are?" Chen had no answer for that. She pushed open the door. The room smelled of antiseptic and something else. Salt water, though they'd cleaned him hours ago. The machines beeped their steady rhythms. Garrett's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. She pulled a chair beside the bed and waited. At 1947 hours, his eyes opened. They were blue, pale as winter ice. They fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to step back. But she held still. "Dr. Chen." Not a question. A recognition. "Mr. Garrett." "Private." The correction came automatically, muscle memory from a war that ended before Chen was born. "Private Daniel Garrett, service number 372846199. "How are you alive?" His mouth twisted. not quite a smile. That's the wrong question. What's the right question? Why am I alive? He shifted slightly, the hospital gown rustling. The door needed a witness. Someone who understood what happened. Someone who could come back when it opened again. Chen's throat felt dry. The door. You found them. The others, in their circles. His eyes drifted toward the window, but she knew he was not seeing Unalaska. He was seeing somewhere else, somewhere deeper. They're still there, not dead, not alive, something else. Fuel. Fuel for what? For the thing that lives in the spaces between moments. Garrett's voice dropped. Between heartbeats, between thoughts. It's old, Dr. Chen. Older than the mountains. Older than the ice. It exists outside time the way we understand it. But every 70 years, give or take, there's a convergence, when it can touch our world. Marcus had entered quietly, setting up a recorder on the side table. Chen did not stop him. You're saying something from outside our reality entered that cave in 1942. No. Garrett's hand, his remaining hand, clenched the blanket. It's always there. The cave is just a thin place, a wound in the world. We opened it by being curious, by wanting to understand. That's all it needed. Our attention, our awareness. Lieutenant Webb was perfect for it. A surveyor, a man who mapped things, who needed to know what things were. Garrett's laugh was bitter. It showed him, showed all of us, patterns, coordinates, mathematics that described how to step outside time. Our minds could not hold it. We shattered. Chen leaned forward. But you survived. It let me go, gave me enough of myself back to function, but it changed me. He held up his stump. I cut this off myself, with Webb's knife. It was the only way to break the connection, the only way to crawl out of that circle before... Stopped. Swallowed hard. Before what? Before I became like them. Part of the whole, part of the fuel. His eyes met hers. I've been in between ever since. Between alive and dead. Between this world and whatever exists on the other side of that door. It kept me preserved, aware, sent me back when the convergences happened. Marcus checked the recorder, then asked quietly, how many times? 17. Garrett closed his eyes. 17 times between 1942 and now. Different places, different doors, all over the world. Indonesia, Scotland, Chile, always the same pattern. The convergence builds. People get drawn in. Curious people, scientists, explorers, people like Webb, people like you. Chen felt ice in her stomach. We were not drawn in. We detected anomalies, magnetic readings. It was science. Was it? Garrett opened his eyes again. Or did you detect the readings because the door wanted you to? Because it was time for new fuel, and you were the right kind of mind? The room fell silent except for the machines. I do not believe in supernatural, neither did Webb. Garrett's voice hardened. He was a scientist too, right up until he was not, right up until he understood that some things exist outside our categories, outside our neat little boxes of natural and unnatural. Marcus shifted his weight. If what you're saying is true, why did it let you close the other doors? Because I was its insurance, its fail-safe. Garrett's breathing had grown labored. Most convergences, someone enters, someone feeds it. But sometimes, like 2009, the timing is off. Too many people, too much attention, wrong variables. Those times, it needed me to seal it from the outside. The file room in the basement of Unalaska's municipal building smelled like damp cardboard and old coffee. Dr. Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, surrounded by boxes the local historian had reluctantly pulled from storage. October morning light filtered through a single high window, illuminating dust motes that drifted like snow. She'd been here since 6 a.m. The interview with Garrett 3 days ago had left her with more questions than answers. If he'd really been institutionalized after 1942, there had to be records, paper trails, something that proved his impossible story wasn't just the delusion of a dying man. The first box yielded nothing. requisition forms from the 1950s, inventory lists for a long-defunct trading post. Chen's back ached from sitting, but she kept digging. Her team was still at the cave site, documenting the chamber, but she couldn't focus on crystalline matrices and electromagnetic readings. Not when Garrett's words kept echoing. It calls to certain kinds of minds. Curious minds. The second box held what she was looking for. Military medical records, transferred from Seattle in 1963 when the facility closed. Most were routine: appendicitis, frostbite, the ordinary ailments of soldiers stationed in America's frozen territories. But near the bottom, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string gone brittle with age, she found a file marked Confidential in faded red ink. The name on the tab, PVT. Daniel J. Garrett. Chen's hands trembled as she untied the string. The intake report from November 1942 documented his arrival at Madigan Army Medical Center near Tacoma. Patient extracted from wilderness after 5 days exposure. Left hand absent, wound cauterized by unknown means. Temperature and pulse normal despite conditions that should have resulted in death. Mental status: severely agitated, non-responsive to questioning, experiencing apparent hallucinations. She flipped through pages of psychiatric evaluations. The doctors noted Garrett's obsessive warnings. The others are still there. They're feeding it. Someone has to watch the doors. By December, they'd diagnosed him with war neurosis and schizophrenia. Standard treatment for the era. Sedation, isolation, electroshock therapy that made Chen's stomach turn. But buried in the clinical language were details that didn't fit any diagnosis she recognized. January 1943. Patient demonstrated knowledge of complex mathematical equations despite 8th grade education. Claims formulas were learned from the cave. Equations verified by consulting physicist as advanced theoretical work, origin unknown. March 1943. Patient became agitated during lunar eclipse, insisting, "The timing is wrong, it's not ready yet." Required restraints. Following day, patient correctly predicted earthquake in Rat Islands, 400 miles distant, 3 hours before seismic activity registered. July 1943. Patient speaking in language not identified by linguistics consultants. When shown recordings, patient stated it is the language it thinks in. Translation: attempts unsuccessful. Chen sat back against the wall, the file trembling in her hands. This wasn't madness. This was exactly what Garrett had described: knowledge that shouldn't exist, awareness that transcended normal human perception. The transfer records painted a disturbing pattern. Garrett moved every 18 months to increasingly remote facilities. Fort Steilacoom to Letterman. General Hospital to a Veterans Administration hospital in Idaho that Chen had never heard of. Each move followed incidents the reports described vaguely. Unauthorized departure from secured ward, unexplained absence of 72 hours, patient found in condition inconsistent with facility security measures. He kept escaping, or something kept letting him escape. The final entry was dated September 1978. Patient transferred to VA facility, Miles City, Montana, under escort. Transport never arrived at destination. Search of route yielded no trace. Patient presumed deceased. Case closed. Chen checked her notes. Marcus DeLuca had found references to an elderly man appearing near geological sites during that same period. Indonesia, 1979. Scotland, 1985. Chile, 1996. Always near caves, always warning people. Away, always disappearing before authorities could identify him. She pulled out her laptop, connecting to the university's archive database through her phone's hotspot. The signal was weak, but she needed to verify something. The search took 3 minutes that felt like an hour. When the results loaded, her breath caught. 17 documented mass disappearances near cave systems between 1978 and 2009. Hikers in Borneo. Researchers in Iceland. A wedding party in New Mexico that vanished during a tour of Carlsbad Caverns. The dates matched the sightings of Garrett's Wanderer, and in each case, authorities found evidence of recent human presence: stones arranged in patterns, symbols scratched into rock, electromagnetic disturbances in the soil. The same pattern Garrett had been building at the cave entrance. "Dr. Chen," she jerked, scattering papers. Michael Sokolov stood in the doorway, his grandfather's assistant at the cultural center. The young man's face was pale. "Sorry to startle you. The hospital called. It's Garrett. They said you'd want to know." Chen was on her feet before he finished speaking. The critical care unit at Unalaska Medical Center was barely larger than a supply closet. Garrett lay in the single bed, monitors beeping steadily. His eyes were open, tracking Chen as she entered. "You found the records," he said. Not a question. "Why didn't you tell me everything?" Chen pulled a chair close. "The disappearances, the other sites—" "Would you have believed me?" Garrett's voice was thin as wire. "You needed to discover it yourself. That's how it works. The curious ones always need to discover." Through the window, Chen could see the sleeping giant rising against gray clouds. "The 17 incidents. You were there." 18. You missed one in Tasmania, 2003. Local government covered it up." Garrett's remaining hand clutched the sheet. "Every time the mathematics aligned, every time a door started to thin, I went. Sometimes I was too late. Sometimes—" his eyes closed. "Sometimes I convinced them to leave. Sometimes I built the patterns and held the door shut long enough for the convergence to pass. Alone, for 30 years. The thing in the cave had made me durable, not immortal, but close enough, suspended between states like Schrodinger's cat, alive and dead and neither." A bitter laugh rattled in his chest. "It needed a witness who could function across multiple convergences. I was the price it paid for Webb's Platoon. 22 minds to feed on, one to send back as insurance." Chen leaned forward. "Garrett, the bodies in the chamber, the medical examiner said they died in 1942, but you're saying they're still aware? Death is a human concept. What they became." Garrett's eyes opened, and in them Chen saw an abyss of remembered horror. "They're not dead. They're fuel. Consciousness without bodies, feeding something that exists outside time the way we understand it. They experience everything and nothing. Forever. That's impossible. So is a 90-year-old man who spent 67 years nowhere and everywhere." Garrett's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me, Dr. Chen. The convergence isn't over, it's building. October 17th is coming, and when it does, that door will try to open again. The cave is sealed. The door isn't the cave. The cave is just where the door is thinnest in this location. But the convergence creates a pull. Your team, the authorities, everyone within a certain radius, they'll start to feel it soon. The compulsion, the need to understand." His grip tightened. "Just like Webb felt it. Just like you're feeling it right now." Chen tried to pull away, but couldn't. Because he was right. She'd felt it in the chamber, studying the bodies. That whisper at the edge of her mind, suggesting there were patterns she was missing, understanding just out of reach. She'd dismissed it as professional curiosity. But it wasn't, was it? "The pattern I've been building," Garrett continued, "it's a disruption field. The mathematics I learned from the cave turned against it. But I'm dying. My body can't sustain the suspension anymore. I won't live to October 17th. Then tell me how to build it. Show me the pattern. I tried that in Tasmania. Explained everything to a physicist, a brilliant woman who understood the theory." Garrett released her wrist. She completed the pattern perfectly, and then she walked into the cave anyway. The door took her and 6 others. Understanding the mathematics isn't enough. You have to resist the call. Outside, the afternoon light was failing. Chen could see her reflection in the window, superimposed over the mountain. She looked tired, haunted. "What do you need me to do?" Garrett's expression softened. "In my belongings, there's a journal. Green canvas cover, water damaged. I've been keeping it since 1942. Everything I've learned about the doors, the convergence cycles, the mathematics, it's all there. The university tried to confiscate it, but I hid it before they could. Back pocket of my coat. Chen stood, found the coat draped over a chair. The journal was exactly where he'd said, pages brittle and stained. She opened it to a random page and saw equations that made her head hurt, interspersed with sketches of stone patterns and desperate handwritten notes. Boulder, Colorado, 1989. Arrived too late. 7 lost. Iceland, 2001. Held the door. 3 saved. The last entry, Garrett whispered. Read it. Chen flipped to the final pages, dated October 2009. Tomorrow marks 67 years. Tomorrow I close the Unalaska door for the last time. I'm dying. The convergence is using the last of my energy to manifest. But I've prepared. I've left the patterns where someone curious enough will find them. Someone like Dr. Chen. Her throat tightened. The others, Webb, Kovac, Holbrook, all of them. They're not dead, not in the way we understand death. They're part of it now. Fuel. Consciousness without bodies, feeding something that exists outside our physical laws. They're aware. They're in agony. They're in... The fog choked Unalaska's streets like breath through wet wool. Sarah Chen stood at the hospital's loading bay entrance watching orderlies wheel Daniel Garrett toward the ambulance that would transport him to Anchorage for federal custody. His eyes tracked her through the glass doors, knowing, resigned. She'd copied everything she could from his journal in the 72 hours they'd given her. Equations, coordinates, sketches of stone arrangements that looked like nothing and meant everything. But there was one thing she hadn't copied, couldn't copy. The weight in his gaze that said you'll understand soon enough. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Red taillights disappeared into the October mist. Marcus DeLuca touched her elbow. Sarah, we need to pack up the cave site. The military's taking over tomorrow. I know. They're going to seal it again. Concrete and steel this time. Maybe explosives. I know. But she didn't move. Couldn't. Because somewhere between reading Garrett's cramped handwriting and watching him die a little more each day, she'd felt it. The thing he'd spent 67 years fighting. Not the pull from the cave. Something else. Something worse. The need to understand. By midnight, the hospital security feed would show the moment Garrett's restraints came undone. The nurses would insist they'd been secured properly. Leather straps, double-checked, regulation protocol. The security guard posted outside his door would describe a sound that made him turn away, just for a moment, a humming that reminded him of his grandmother's church in Sitka, organ pipes and incense. When he turned back, the room was empty. The window, reinforced glass, 3rd floor, stood open to the rain. Sarah didn't learn about the escape until 0347 hours, when her satellite phone screamed her awake in the research station's cramped quarters. Special Agent Marcus Reeves's voice cut through the static. Chen, your patient is gone. She sat up, heart jackknifing. What do you mean, gone? I mean he walked out of a locked room on the 3rd floor, left his hospital gown folded on the bed, took nothing except a pause. Papers rustling. Jesus. He took your research notes, the ones you left in his room. The ones with the cave's exact coordinates, the depth measurements, the composition analysis of the crystalline walls, the maps showing how to get there. He's going back, Sarah whispered. To the cave. Chen, he can barely walk. He's 90 years old, maybe older, and he's been institutionalized for... You don't understand. He's not like us anymore. He hasn't been for 67 years. Another pause. When Reeves spoke again, his voice had shifted. Cop to investigator, procedure to instinct. What did he tell you? In the interviews? What didn't make it into the reports? Sarah pressed her forehead against the cold window. Outside, Unalaska huddled under rain and darkness, its few hundred residents asleep, unaware that something older than the war was waking up in the mountain above them. He told me the others are still conscious. Webb, Kovac, Holbrook, all 22 of them. They're not dead. They're sustaining it, feeding it with their awareness, and every convergence it tries to reach through them, tries to open the door wider. You sound like you believe him. Did she? Sarah watched her reflection in the glass. A 43-year-old woman who'd spent 20 years studying rock formations, magnetic fields, geological probability. A scientist. A rationalist. But she'd read Holbrook's journal. She'd seen the bodies arranged in their impossible circles. She'd felt the hum in the chamber just for a moment before her team evacuated, and it had felt like recognition, like something in the cave knew her, had been waiting for her. I believe he thinks he's telling the truth, she said carefully. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. Reeves exhaled. Local PD is organizing a search at first light. State troopers are en route from Anchorage, but with the weather, we're looking at noon before they arrive. I need you to tell me where he'd go. Best guess. Sarah closed her eyes. Saw Garrett's final journal entry, the one dated October 16th, 2009, written in preparation for a moment he'd known was coming for 67 years. Tomorrow, I close the Unalaska door for the last time. I'm dying. I can feel it. The convergence is using the last of my energy to manifest. October 17th. Today. The cave entrance, she said. The one the military sealed in 1942. He'll go there first. Why? It's been sealed for decades, solid concrete. Because that's where the door is thinnest. Where Webb's platoon opened it the first time. Garrett told me the entity remembers anniversaries, times and places. It's strongest on the dates when it was fed before. She could hear Reeves processing this, his training at war with the impossible. Chen, level with me. Is this man dangerous? Not to us. Then to who? To himself. He's trying to close something that doesn't want to be closed. And if he fails... Sarah opened her eyes. Through the rain, she could see the dark bulk of the sleeping giant, invisible against the night sky, but present like a held breath. Then what happened to Webb's platoon happens again. But this time, there are 400 people on this island. The search began at 0600 with 12 men, Unalaska PD, hospital security, 2 National Guard volunteers from the small base near Dutch Harbor. Sarah insisted on joining, along with Marcus DeLuca and Sanvi Patel from her team. Patricia Yamada stayed at the research station to monitor seismic activity. Special Agent Reeves met them in the parking lot of the Grand Aleutian Hotel, rain drumming on his bureau windbreaker. He looked like he hadn't slept, which meant he'd spent the night reading the files Sarah had forwarded. The real files. The ones with Garrett's drawings and the cave's impossible mathematics. He has maybe a 6-hour head start, Reeves said, spreading a topographical map across the hood of his rental SUV. On foot, in this weather, elderly man, how far could he get? Depends on whether he's still just a man, Marcus muttered. Reeves shot him a look. Sarah intervened. The sealed entrance is here. She tapped the map, a point 8 miles northeast of town, accessible by a deteriorating mining road that hadn't seen maintenance since the 1960s. But Garrett won't take the road. Too exposed. He knows you'll be looking. So where? She traced a different route, up through the hills behind the airport, along a ridge that would be murder in this weather but would keep him off main paths. Here, through the backcountry. It's slower, but he's not trying to escape, Reeves finished. He's trying to arrive. On time. Exactly. The search team split into 3 groups. Reeves took the mining road with local PD. Marcus led National Guard up the eastern approach. Sarah took the ridge route with Saanvi and 2 Unalaska officers who'd grown up hunting these hills. They found the first sign 2 hours in. Officer Tom Alexeyev spotted it. A cairn of stones arranged on a flat rock, pattern too deliberate for nature. 5 stones in a spiral, each one a different mineral composition. Basalt, magnetite, something that looked like quartz but refracted light wrong. Sarah knelt in the mud, rain streaming down her face. The arrangement matched one of Garrett's sketches, a marker, or a ward. He came through here, she said. When? Saanvi asked. Sarah touched the top stone, still warm, despite the rain. Recently, maybe an hour ago. Alexeyev frowned. That's impossible. This is 3 miles from the hospital, uphill, in the dark. But his partner, a younger woman named Chen, no relation, was staring past the cairn toward the tree line. "Hey, do you guys hear that?" They all stopped, listened. At first, just rain, wind through scrub pine, the distant hammer of surf against rocks. Then, underneath, a hum, low, persistent, just at the edge of hearing, like the tinnitus Sarah had developed after too many hours in the cave chamber. "Seismic activity," Marcus suggested through the radio. "Patricia, are you picking up anything?" Static crackled. Then Patricia's voice tight. "Yes, and it's not natural. The epicenter is moving, northeast, toward the sealed cave," Sarah finished. They ran. The terrain fought them. Loose shale, rain-slicked rock, visibility down to 20 feet in the thickening fog. Officer Chen twisted her ankle. Alexeyev had to help her back toward the vehicles. That left Sarah, Sanvi, and Marcus pushing forward, following the faint path of disturbed earth and occasional stone. Markers. The hum grew louder. By the time they crested the ridge overlooking the cave site, Sarah's teeth were vibrating. Sanvi had stopped talking, face pale, one hand pressed to her temple. Marcus was breathing through his mouth, like the air had grown too thick for normal respiration. Below them, through sheets of rain, the sealed cave entrance was visible, a concrete plug set into the mountainside, weathered and cracked but still intact. A chain-link fence surrounded it, warning signs in English and Unangan. Garrett stood before it. He'd stripped to the waist despite the cold, his torso a roadmap of scars, old and new, surgical and self-inflicted. His left arm ended at the wrist, the ancient stump raised toward the concrete like a divining rod. Around him, he'd arranged stones in a pattern that made Sarah's eyes hurt to track, a fractal that seemed to fold into dimensions her brain couldn't process. But he hadn't completed it. Garrett, the wind off the Bering Sea cut through Sarah Chen's jacket as she crouched beside Marcus Reeves on the volcanic ridge, binoculars pressed to her face. Below, Daniel Garrett worked with the focused intensity of a man defying death itself. "He's barely breathing," Reeves said, lowering his own binoculars. "How is he still moving?" Sarah didn't answer. She'd stopped trying to apply normal rules to anything connected to this mountain. The manhunt had consumed 6 days. 6 days of chasing shadows across Unalaska's interior, following electromagnetic anomalies that registered on her equipment like breadcrumbs. 6 days of waking to find her team members standing in half circles outside their tents, staring toward the sleeping giant with expressions she recognized from the photographs of Webb's platoon. The pull was getting stronger. Below, Garrett arranged stones in a pattern that hurt to look at directly. Each rock placed with mathematical precision, creating angles that seemed to fold into themselves. Sarah recognized the formation from his journal, a fractal disruption array designed to create electromagnetic interference that would counteract the cave's natural convergence field. "Dr. Chen." Officer James Nakamura from the Alaska State Troopers approached from behind, his voice tight. "We need to move now. He's almost through the concrete." Sarah could see it herself. The barrier that had sealed the cave entrance for 67 years was cracking, great chunks of concrete falling away as if dissolving from the inside. Garrett worked bare-handed, pulling debris aside with strength that should have been impossible for his frail body. "Wait." Sarah held up a hand. "Look at what he's doing." Marcus DeLuca and Sanvi Patel joined them on the ridge, both looking pale. Sarah had noticed they kept drifting toward each other, unconsciously forming patterns. The same thing happening to the FBI agents positioned around the perimeter, the National Guard squad that had flown in from Anchorage. Everyone was starting to feel it. "The stones," Marcus said, his voice distant. "It's the same formation from the petroglyphs, the summoning circle." "Not summoning." Sarah adjusted the focus on her binoculars, studying Garrett's weathered face. "Sealing." Even from 100 yards away, she could see how the old man moved, each gesture deliberate, each stone placed with absolute certainty. This wasn't the desperate flight of a fugitive. This was ritual, purpose. The hum started at 7:43 a.m. Sarah felt it in her molars first, then deeper, in her sternum, in the meat of her thoughts, the same frequency Holbrook had described in his journal, the same pull that had drawn 23 men into concentric circles and burned their brains to ash. "Doctor," Sanvi gripped her arm. "I can feel it. I can feel something." Sarah looked at her graduate student. Sanvi's pupils had dilated, her breathing synchronized with the pulse emanating from the mountain. Around them, the assembled searchers began to sway. "Marcus, get her back to the vehicles." Sarah's own voice sounded strange, like she was speaking underwater. "I'm not leaving you." Marcus met her eyes, and she saw the same war happening inside him. The geophysicist who needed to understand fighting against the primal brain that screamed to run. "Then stay close." Sarah started down the slope toward Garrett. She kept her eyes on the pattern of stones, using them as an anchor. The mathematics of it. The way each rock created an angle that disrupted the eye's natural tendency to follow lines. Garrett had learned this from the thing in the cave, she realized. The entity had taught him how to build its own cage. Agent Reeves followed her, hand on his sidearm, though what good a gun would do here, Sarah had no idea. Behind them, she heard Nakamura speaking into his radio, his words coming slow and slurred. The crack in the sealed entrance widened. Sarah's equipment registered a massive spike in electromagnetic activity. Her portable magnetometer screamed warnings about field disruptions. The ground-penetrating radar showed the void beneath the mountain, that cathedral chamber where 22 bodies still sat in their eternal circles, beginning to pulse. Garrett looked up as they approached. His face was the color of old parchment, sweat running in rivulets despite the October cold. His left arm, the one that ended in that impossible cauterized stump, trembled. "Dr. Chen." His voice carried surprising clarity. "You shouldn't be here, not this close." "Neither should you." Sarah stopped 20 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting over the rising hum. "Daniel, whatever you're trying to do, let us help." "Can't." He placed another stone, his hands shaking. "Has to be me. I'm the lock. I'm the only one who can." His words trailed off as his knees buckled. Sarah started forward, but Garrett held up his stump, warning her back. "The pattern. I have to finish the pattern. Before—" The cave entrance exploded outward. Not with force or debris, but with sound, with presence. The hum became a roar that existed below hearing, above thought, in the space between moments. Sarah felt her body respond against her will, her feet carrying her toward the darkness that yawned in the mountainside. Around her, everyone moved. The FBI agents, the state troopers, Marcus, and Sanvi. Even Reeves, his face slack with something between terror and rapture. They walked toward the entrance in perfect synchronization, their expressions transforming into the same transcendent peace Sarah had seen on the preserved faces of Webb's platoon, all of them drawn like iron filings to a magnet. "No." Garrett's voice cracked. He tried to stand, failed, tried again. "No, not again, not more fuel, not more—" His heart gave out at 8:47 a.m. Sarah saw it happen, saw the old man's eyes go wide, his hand clutching at his chest, saw him collapse across his incomplete pattern, his body falling with the slow grace of a man who had been dying for 67 years and had finally run out of borrowed time. But she couldn't stop walking toward the cave. Her mind screamed at her legs, her muscles, her disobedient flesh that carried her forward step by inexorable step. The rational part of her brain, the scientist who had spent her career studying geological phenomena, catalogued every sensation. The way the pull felt like hooks behind her ribs. The way her heart synchronized with the pulse from below. The way understanding whispered at the edges of her consciousness, promising answers to questions she hadn't known to ask. Just like it had whispered to Marcus Webb. 20 feet from the entrance now, 15. Sarah could see into the darkness, see the way it moved like a living thing, breathing in and out in rhythm with the mountain's pulse. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Her team, the searchers, everyone drawn into the same inexorable current. Garrett's pattern lay incomplete on the ground. 12 stones in a spiral. He'd needed 15. Sarah's grandmother had been a mathematician, had taught her about the Fibonacci sequence when she was 8 years old, showing her how the spiral appeared in nautilus shells, in galaxies, in the fundamental architecture of creation. The pattern never forgot. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. She was 10 feet from the cave mouth when her hand shot out, grabbing a fist-sized chunk of hematite from the debris. Her body still moving forward, still obeying the call, but her mind, that curiosity that had driven her entire career, that need to understand that had brought her here in the first place, that part of her brain was still hers. Garrett had used 3 types of stone: hematite for iron content, magnetite for magnetic properties, basalt for the crystalline structure. Sarah's feet carried her 5 feet from the entrance. 4. She threw the hematite stone, not into the cave, into the pattern, the 13th, stone placed where geometry and instinct told her it belonged. The hum faltered. Sarah's next step landed awkward, her body suddenly her own again. She stumbled, caught herself, spun to see the others also lurching to confused stops. Marcus looked around wild-eyed. Sanvi was crying. Reeves had his gun drawn but didn't seem to remember why. The entrance was still open. The pull still there, just weaker, bearable. Sarah dropped to her knees beside Garrett's body. The old man's eyes were still open, staring up at the sky with an expression of profound relief. His right hand was extended, pointing to where the 14th stone should go. "I understand," Sarah whispered. She found magnetite next, placed it where Garrett had indicated. The pull weakened further. The hum dropped in pitch. The 15th stone was basalt. Sarah had to crawl 10 feet to find one the right size, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. Behind her, she heard someone walking toward the cave again. One of the FBI agents, his will breaking under the renewed pull. She placed the final stone. The effect was immediate and absolute. The hum cut off mid-frequency, leaving a silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure. The cave entrance, that 40-foot maw that had yawned in the mountainside, began to close, not with debris or collapse, but with growth. The crystalline mineral matrix Sarah had studied in the deeper tunnels began to accelerate, spreading across the opening like ice forming on glass. The rock grew and grew, forming new basalt, new stone, knitting itself together with the speed of time-lapse photography. In 30 seconds, the entrance was gone. Just blank cliff face, as if the cave had never existed, as if it had never been there at all. Sarah sat back hard, her breath coming in gasps. Around her, the others were coming back to themselves. Confusion, horror, shame at how close they'd come to walking into that darkness. She looked down at Daniel Garrett's body, the man who had sacrificed 67 years to keep the doors closed, who had lived suspended between moments, aging and not aging, dying and not dying, all to prevent what almost happened today. "Thank you," she whispered. Garrett's eyes stared past her at clouds that raced overhead like they were fleeing. The mountain sealed itself before Sarah's eyes. Crystalline formations erupted from the edges of the cave entrance, spreading like frost across a winter window. She stood 3 yards back from the array of stones Daniel Garrett had taught her to complete, watching new rock consume the 40-foot opening in accelerating pulses. The basalt grew from the perimeter inward, each surge accompanied by a crackling sound like breaking glass played in reverse. 30 seconds. That's how long it took for the wound in the world to close. The humming ceased completely. The silence that followed felt solid enough to touch. Sarah's legs gave out. She dropped to her knees on the volcanic soil, hands shaking, bile rising in her throat. Around her, the others were stirring. Marcus DeLuca blinking in confusion. Sanvi Patel touching her face as if checking she still existed. FBI agents and state troopers looking at each other with the bewildered expressions of people waking from shared nightmares. Agent Marcus Reeves recovered first. He approached Sarah slowly, the way you'd approach someone standing on a ledge. "Dr. Chen, are you injured?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "The cave." He turned to look at the cliff face. Where the entrance had yawned moments before, there was only seamless basalt. No crack, no seam, no evidence an opening had ever existed. "I saw it close. We all saw it." "Yes." "That's not possible." Sarah laughed, the sound brittle. "Define possible, Agent Reeves." She pushed herself to her feet, her knees protesting. 15 yards to her left, Daniel Garrett's body lay where he'd fallen, his face peaceful in death. The morning sun broke through the fog for the first time in days, illuminating his scarred, impossibly old features. "Someone get a blanket," Sarah said quietly. "Cover him. He deserves that much." A state trooper moved to comply. Sarah watched, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. The 67 years Garrett had carried this burden, the 22 men still entombed in the chamber below, the knowledge of 33 other doors scattered across the world. Marcus DeLuca joined her, rubbing his temples. "What just happened? 1 minute I was standing behind you, the next?" He looked toward where the cave had been. "I was walking toward it. I couldn't stop myself." "None of us could," Sanvi added, her voice small. She was hugging herself, shivering despite her jacket. "It was beautiful. What I felt. Like every question I'd ever had was about to be answered." "That's what it does," Sarah said. "That's how it feeds." Reeves studied her with sharp eyes. "You're speaking about it like it's alive." "I don't know what it is, but Garrett did, and he spent 67 years making sure no one else had to find out." She walked to Garrett's body as the trooper finished covering it with a thermal blanket. The makeshift shroud didn't hide his missing left hand, the stump visible where the blanket fell short. The hand he'd severed to escape the circle in 1942, cauterized by forces that kept him suspended between states of existence for 7 decades. Sarah crouched beside him. "Thank you," she whispered. The stone array he'd built, that she'd completed, formed a perfect fractal pattern around them. Hematite, magnetite, and basalt arranged according to the golden ratio, creating an electromagnetic disruption field that counteracted the cave's convergence. Technology that shouldn't exist, based on physics that Earth science was only beginning to understand. But it worked. "We need to document this," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "The patterns, the measurements." "No." He looked at her, startled. Sarah stood, brushing volcanic dust from her knees. "No photographs, no measurements, no documentation. But what happened here can't become a roadmap." She met his eyes, then Sanvi's, then Reeves's. "Garrett spent his life sealing these doors. The last thing he'd want is for us to publish coordinates and instructions for finding more." "Dr. Chen," Reeves said carefully, "I have a responsibility to report this to my superiors." "Then report it. Tell them an elderly fugitive died of a heart attack on Unalaska Island. Tell them the cave site showed no evidence of the bodies reported in 2009, that our initial findings were contaminated by equipment malfunction. Tell them whatever you need to tell them." She held his gaze. "But don't give them a way to replicate what we found." Silence stretched between them. A raven called from somewhere in the fog. "There will be questions," Reeves said finally. "There are always questions." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll need statements from everyone. For the record." "Of course." The team began the trek back down the mountain as medical personnel arrived to retrieve Garrett's body. Sarah lingered, looking at the cliff face one last time. Somewhere beneath that rock, 400 feet down, 22 men sat in their eternal circles, their consciousness long since dissolved into fuel for something that existed outside normal space and time. Private James Holbrook was down there. The farm boy from Wisconsin who'd written in his journal about choices and understanding and doors that were always going to open. The husband who'd loved his wife Eleanor enough to document everything so their children might know the truth. Eleanor had died in 1987, never knowing what happened to her husband. But her granddaughter Claire lived in Minneapolis now, teaching high school history. Sarah had her contact information from the research phase before everything had spiraled into impossibility. She'd call her. Not today, probably not this week, but soon. Claire deserved to know that her grandfather hadn't simply vanished, that his final words had meaning, that his death had saved something important even if she could never fully understand what. The hike down took 3 hours. Sarah's muscles ached, her head throbbed from dehydration and stress, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. But her mind was clear for the first time since she'd detected those initial anomalies on the ground-penetrating radar. She understood now what Garrett had meant about curiosity being a hook in the chest. She'd felt it herself, standing at the cave entrance, fighting every instinct that screamed to walk forward, to see, to understand what Lieutenant Marcus Webb had understood in 1942. The compulsion hadn't been fear, it had been desire. That was the horror of it. Back at the research station, she found Garrett's journal waiting where she'd left it, hidden in her personal gear. His final entry stared up at her in cramped, fading ink. Dr. Chen will understand. She felt the pull. She resisted. That makes her capable. That makes her the next witness. She sat alone in her quarters as dusk fell over Unalaska, reading through 67 years of accumulated knowledge. Convergence patterns. Mathematical formulae describing temporal thin points. Locations of the 33 other doors Garrett had identified worldwide. 18 he'd successfully sealed. 15 still active, still cycling toward their own manifestations. The next major convergence, according to his calculations, would occur in Borneo. 2018, give or take a year. Then Iceland in 2024. New Mexico in 2031. And Unalaska again in 2076. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began making copies. Encrypted files saved to multiple secure locations. She'd learned from Garrett's mistakes. He'd carried too much alone, trusted too few people with the burden of knowledge. 3 weeks later, she was back in Fairbanks when the official report came through. Daniel Garrett, 87, died of cardiac arrest during apprehension on Unalaska Island. No evidence found to support claims of cave system or historical remains. Case closed. Her university quietly terminated her research grant. 2 team members transferred to other institutions. Marcus DeLuca requested psychological leave. Sanvi Patel went back to India to visit family and never returned. But Agent Reeves called her in November. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her, "about not creating a roadmap. And I agree. Officially." A pause. "Unofficially, I've been reviewing cold cases. Missing persons in geological areas. There are patterns, Dr. Chen. Clusters every 60 to 75 years. Same signatures, people entering caves or canyons and never coming out. Strange seismic activity. Electromagnetic anomalies." Sarah's hand tightened on her phone. "How many?" "Dozens. Maybe more. I haven't finished cross-referencing yet." Another pause. "I think we should compare notes?" She closed her eyes. The hook, reeling her in again. But this time it wasn't the cave's compulsion. It was human choice. The decision to know, to act, to carry the burden Garrett had carried. "I'll send you what I have," she said. They met twice in person over the following months. In March, a geologist from Iceland contacted her, a colleague who'd found similar crystalline formations in a lava tube near Reykjavik. In June, a graduate student in New Mexico sent her scans of petroglyphs matching the patterns from Unalaska. The network began to form. By September 2010, there were 6 of them. Researchers, investigators, people who'd brushed against the edges of something impossible and couldn't look away. They shared information carefully, paranoidly, using encryption and dead drops like Cold War spies. In October, Sarah received a letter from Claire Holbrook. She'd sent it, weeks earlier, a carefully worded request for information about her grandfather's platoon. Sarah read it 3 times before responding, weighing every word. How much to reveal? How much truth could someone handle? In the end, she sent copies of the journal entries James Holbrook had written. Not Garrett's journal, that contained too much dangerous knowledge, but the pages documenting the discovery, the descent, the final moments of awe and terror. Claire called her 2 days later. "My grandmother never stopped believing he was alive somewhere," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She used to say she could feel him, that he hadn't left her completely." Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. The journal, it